who watch there's a great I'm a big Star Trek fan. Sorry to nerd out on you here for a minute. But but
me too.
there's
It's a sign of intelligence.
Right, I guess so. There's a great episode of Star Trek in the Next Generation series that's entitled "Who Watches the Watchers?" Right,
Huh.
and that's such a wonderful concept of, there's always the possibility of unethical conduct happening at the highest level, because nobody's watching what the people who watch, the people who are controlling the ethics, nobody watches what they're doing, right? There's no board of ethics over a board of ethics. So we have this perpetual problem of who watches the people who are doing the watching, right? And so the people at the highest levels of government have no oversight. And so our government is supposed to be a circle, right? That's the solution to this problem. Who watches the watchers, right? We have the three branches of government, and they're supposed to have checks and balances between the three of them so that there's no specific, on top thing. But we have that for actual power, actual division of power. We don't necessarily have that for ethics, right? And so we have this idea of, we have the Oklahoma Ethics Commission, and the ethics laws and guidelines, which you can, I have all that laid out here, which governs the laws of the conduct of state officers and state employees, campaigns for state office. That's really the main thing that the Oklahoma Ethics Commission does, and state questions, and lobbyists, like things like PACs, political action committees, right? And there's these,
because none of those are bad.
Yeah, you're right. No, none of them. So, which is the source of pretty much all dark money, right? Comes from those. But these laws are basically disclosure. The ethical laws are basically disclosure. You have to disclose who's giving money and for what purpose. But let me ask you this: what good does that do at the end of the day? Right? How does that actually stop? It doesn't actually stop anybody from giving money. And so, we have this problem. I'm going to skip down a little bit to a later slide, because it illustrates, when we can come back maybe, but it illustrates, where's it? The electioneering ethical dilemma, right? So to get elected, you need to amplify your voice. You got to get votes if you want to get elected. So how do you amplify your voice? Well, that requires money. You have to send out mailers. You have to have social media management. You have to have campaign managers, phone banks, TV or radio spots. So you need money to get elected. Well, in order to get money, you have to sell promises to people who have money. So by the time you get elected, you owe a lot of money back in promises, and are no longer free to serve the people you promised to work for, but rather you are obligated to serve the money interests that you now must pay back.
Yeah.
Gosh, it reminds me of school choice. What about you, Michael?
Well, so we talk about money all the time. I mean, that's money talks.
Right. Absolutely.
And in a lot of these ethical, agencies and things like that you mentioned before, Matt, I mean, money is what drives all these things and all the things they do. I mean, they make their decisions based on money. I mean, look at like the pharmaceutical companies, like you were talking about with the prescriptions and this and that. I mean, that's all based 100% on how much money they're going to get. And then there's kickbacks to the government in some way, or these agencies, or, whatever. It's ridiculous.
It is. But I think there's actually some common ground here between conservatives and liberals on wanting more ethical regulation. Because, I listen to some of my friends across the aisle and on the left side, and they seem to want ethical regulation just as much as the other side does. I think there's this general sense of people are sick of the win at any cost sort of mentality. In government and especially in the higher levels of government, and this just back and forth infighting and bickering and all of that. I think people want to return to a sort of sense of civility at the very least.
Yeah.
Right.
But Matt, one thing I want to ask you, since we're right here in this particular point, I mean, ethics is kind of a social agreement, you know, how we're going to do things, you know, as a society. But when you have something so polarized, like the right and the left, and on some of these issues that, I mean, are so far on either side, I mean, how do you actually get an ethical solution when you have a group that is so one side and a group that is so the other side?
Yeah. So in order to find common ground, we might not be able to find common ground on an issue, but we probably could find common ground on a process, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, no, that totally makes sense, because you're right. There are lots of things that I'm not going to agree with the left on, but
right.
I could agree with them on a way to make things happen
Right.
that would benefit us both, you know, like in ethics. Yeah. Makes perfect sense.
And then making sure that everyone has fair representation of their side on the ethics board. So if we're going to have an ethics board, maybe we need of 10 members, maybe 4 of them need to be left leaning, and maybe 1 of them in the middle, and maybe 4 right leaning, and then maybe 1 independent, right?
Yeah.
Or something along those lines, so that there's some sort of adequate representation of the American people in these boards. And then what that does by setting the system up that way is, if you only have 4 people on your side in a 10-person board, and you need at least 6 people to get, a majority plus 1 of the vote, you've got to flip at least 2 people on the other side in order to make anything happen. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what that does is it encourages, if you ever want to do anything and get anything accomplished, that means you gotta learn how to extend olive branches. And that's what that's what people have forgotten how to do. Most our legislators up in Washington is, we all used to get a little bit of what we wanted, because they make deals and say, okay, you want this, I'll give you this, but I want that, so you need to give me that, and we'd make concessions. And that's how, when I do a mediation for someone in the legal field, that's how mediation works, right? Is think of it like a divorce. I've got 2 people who are polar opposites of each other. They don't agree about anything. They both think that they should have the child, the house, the kid, the car, right? So we have to figure out a way that's equitable and between the 2 of them to for them both to continue to have their parental rights and continue to have a fair distribution of their property, and all of these things. And so we sort of come to this. We have this process where we come to this. We sit down at a table with either side, and who have these attorneys representing them, and we talk back and forth with a mediator. And the mediator's job is to make sure communication is happening between the 2 polar opposite sides. And that's what we're missing in politics, essentially, is a mediator, somebody who is helping to make sure that both sides are actually listening to and hearing each other.
Well, and
then
I think
making
part of the
making concessions.
That's part of the reason why I sought you out in the first place. I mean, we can look at our own Republican Party in Oklahoma.
Mhm.
I mean, we're all divided up into factions. One group is doing this, another group is doing this. And as I've always said, being a conservative and leading conservatives is like leading cats. I mean, that's the one reason why we always seem to be on the losing end. You have one
Yep.
side who just likes to follow, and then you have the other side that wants to lead. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to lead. So
Yeah.
it can just be impossible to do that. But we've gotten to a point where at one time, we could argue about conservative principles and say, okay, that one maybe so much, but this one's really a central principle. Can't we at least get behind this one? Well, but not
Yeah.
if we don't do this one. And then we have to have,
Right.
so we're arguing now to the point where we can't even as conservatives be in the same room and decide to aim all of our weaponry down the line at one target, because
Yeah.
we're just mainly in a circular firing squad all the time. And
Yeah.
we're missing the ability to, apparently, we've lost individual moral responsibility. And
Yes.
we have to always be right, and we have to be the one that's always right. And I think a lot of it, because I saw a lot of this come up after the January 6th thing and after the
Mhm.
election, Trump's last election.
Mhm.
That is what I think it woke up so many people, and they had
Mhm.
no idea what to do, because the scales just suddenly fell from their eyes, and they, so what do I do about it?
What
Well,
do I
when
do?
somebody doesn't have or understand what an actual course of action is,
Mhm.
oftentimes they'll get angry because
Sure.
that there's not a solution. And this, Matt, as a mediator, that tends to be what happens when you don't give people solutions. They'll
Mhm.
just get mad,
Yeah.
and they'll get mad at one another, and they don't know what to do. And I don't know how you fix it at this point, because I'm as frustrated as anybody else over that stupid election. And I have the fear, with many other people, that our elections have now been compromised,
Sure.
that the voice of the American people isn't really being heard. I have those same concerns, and I'm not necessarily sure what to do with them either. But I don't think yelling at my fellow conservatives or splintering off or any of those things
It's
is
not
going to help.
helpful, right? One of the things that the Democrats do well is that we could learn from them is that they take groups of very disjointed people who have almost nothing in common, and they find commonality among them through feelings, like how they feel to be to
Yeah.
be a minority, right? And so it's sort of like, what does being a Hispanic minority have to do with being gay in America? Well, really not much, right? There's not a whole lot of common ground between being Hispanic and being gay, except that both of those people feel like their voice isn't heard, or that they don't have fair representation in the system, right? And so something that Democrats do that's been very effective is they take this sort of idea of, if you've ever felt like like the world is unfair, come to our party. We will, we have all the answers, we have all the solutions. uh, and so it's sort of, they've been able to unite these groups that really don't have any connection with one another, and bring them into this big umbrella by uniting them under one banner of, we feel helpless, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
And I think conservatives have that same feeling to some extent, or are at least starting to more nowadays. And so, how do we unite the party? Um, that it's easier said than done, right?
Oh, yeah. Because
But
you got people out there now who will just say, I'm not compromising, you're a rhino. Well,
yeah,
okay, but
yeah,
what makes you a rhino? I mean, now I'm a rhino to people because I'm not going to bash other people or jump
right.
into a group with somebody else. All of this is simply nonsense and getting us literally
No,
nowhere.
it is right. Shooting yourself in the foot
Oh,
and
yeah.
blaming the gun. Yeah,
Mhm.
I yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? And so, to some extent, we have to go back to uh, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay, maybe we can't all agree on who to support or what path to take forward, but we can agree that we believe in the Constitution, we believe in the rule of law, and we want it enforced. And so maybe we can just go back to fundamentals of
Right.
what can we can agree that we want the law to be enforced, so let's make that happen, right? We want ethics enforced, let's make that happen, right? And then leave the leave some of these polarizing matters to out of the law, because really, some of these things that are dividing us aren't even issues that government should be involved in the first place. So why are we allowing them to control the conversation, when instead we should be looking for ways to mutually benefit our society and our economy and those types of things, development at the local level, or whatever, those types of things that we can agree on, that we all want and all need, and less time spent focusing on the things that we're just hitting heads against. I think that's a big a big key to the solution of that problem. Um,
Well,
and
Carl just said, the Bible has the best morals, the 10 Commandments. We stopped educating with good morals because we have a separation of church and state. Well, and it's
yeah,
interesting, to hear him say that, because
Yeah.
I just started reading the book Bonhoeffer, and Bonhoeffer's, I've got to go back and take my book and read this because I listen audiobook. But I want to go take it and actually read the section where he said this was during his education himself,
yeah,
where he talks about there has to be a separation between church and state, because what happens is the state comes in and affects the church
hmm
even. And we always think it's going to be the other way, that the church will affect the state, but what ends up happening is, I just saw him say bad culture is pushing bad morals. Well, when you get a bad culture, it pulls everything down, and you're literally doing the opposite by combining church and state. You're literally doing the opposite eventually of what you started out trying to do in the first place, because bad morals will always pull everything down the other way, and morals are always going to start in the home. You
yeah,
can't, it's kind of like, we talked about this at one point in our earlier conversation about, Matt, where laws cannot enforce behaviors. I mean, they can to some degree. You can't drink at the bar and go get in your car and kill somebody driving on the way home.
right,
But they can't make you can pass all the laws you want. But if internally we don't understand what morals are, and we haven't been taught what those are, no set of laws is going to affect us. And
yep,
honestly, I think people who are psychotic, who
hmm
literally are sociopaths and don't understand the difference between wrong and right, they're the perfect examples to go to here in that
right.
illustration. There are literally places, there are literally people who don't understand, the difference between wrong and right. Oh, and
Yeah.
and
then
and that's something we talked about on the phone when we spoke last week.
yeah,
Is that there's been a fundamental change in how we deal with mental health, right?
yeah,
And the DSM, and there's always these constant changes in the world of psychology, sociology, that seems to push the idea of moral relativism, where now it's oh, you're sexually attracted to children. Well, that doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you a minor attracted person. And we need to change the terminology to paint you as a victim of your own brain rather than somebody who has
Right.
moral and ethical mental problems that need to correcting, right? And so we have this sort of general change in well, in two things, and it started in the sociology world. The first was the book that came out. I think it was Dr. Spock's book about children that came out. That basically,
Oh my.
we need to. What's that?
Oh no, I was completely agreeing with you because I was given that book when I had my first child in 1983. And
Yeah.
I looked at that and I thought, are you joking me? What are we
Right.
talking about here? What am I here
Right.
for then? Let them
Right.
do whatever they want. What?
Yeah. But this pervasive
Well, thank
mentality
you.
of let's let the kids just do whatever they want,
Right.
and it's okay because nothing there's really no right or wrong. It's all just relative. So let's just let them do whatever they want, and it's created an entire it's created this problem
Yeah.
because now we have, like you said, 1980s, so now we have 40 years of generations of kids that whose parents just basically let them do whatever they want and didn't teach them right from wrong and said
Well, and let's dovetail on top of that real quick, Matt. What came in 40 years ago? The Department of Education, like Carl said,
Yep.
the government really has no business being in the education of our kids in any capacity.
No, we need Carl on our
Exactly.
board.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
But there again, you have the growing overreach of the government, which doesn't have our best interests, our kids' best interests, education.
Yeah.
I mean, if the government was so good being in education, I mean, we would be going up, not down. I mean, it's pretty obvious we're getting worse and worse. The just the culture in general, the morals and the values that are just taught. I mean, you don't even have discipline in a classroom anymore.
Yep.
You have to basically just try to control the worst students, and there's nothing you can even do about it. I mean, it's I agree. I told Jenny a long time ago. I sent her a meme. I said, we need to make a little meme about when this country was founded. Back, I got my Betsy Ross flag on today, but you go back to colonial America, it was all homeschool. I mean, it's literally homeschool,
One room
guns,
schoolhouses,
self-sufficiency, self-reliance. And we produce those people are the generations before us. They produced everything that we have now. I mean, because of those things. I mean, I just hate that the government is so involved.
And that was the generation that won 2 world wars and sent mankind to the moon.
Isn't that crazy? It just every time I even think about that, it just I don't understand. I just simply don't understand the mentality. I guess we were talking the other day, Michael and I were talking about how, when things happened with our kids at school or with other, kids or whatever, the first thing we do is turn around and look at our own kids and go, what'd you do?
Yeah,
What's your issue? What kind
Mhm.
of thing did you get into? I mean, we were never looking at any, but that's not the way it is anymore. The way it is anymore is who did what to you,
Yep.
and it's got to stop. But I think it does go back to what Carl said earlier about the state-run public school system is the largest church, because
it really is.
once we start using public funds to do something that was another thing in Bonhoeffer's book that was so interesting to me. So he was right in the middle because he lived in Prussia. So before Germany was ever even created, he lived in Prussia, and the Prussian system of education is where we get our
100%.
education. And it
Yeah.
was so bad that his mother, and so think about how long ago that was, the middle 1800s, right?
Yep.
And his mother was like, I'm not sending you people to this school system. This is ridiculous. It's all
Yeah.
you'll do what I say, and this is what it is, and the government runs it, and this is how. And
Mhm.
so it's just fascinating that somehow that we believe that this system is the best system to educate our kids, and you have people literally going out creating all kinds of chaos on social media, calling people names, doxing them over public education.
Yep. Well, and that brings me to the subversion process here, which I
Oh,
think
good.
well, I think it's important for people to realize, to understand this and how it works. I don't think people, once you see it, you can't ever unsee it, if that makes sense. So we need to awaken people to what's happening to them, to us as a country, so that we can start to see it and not be affected, and choose to not be affected by it, right? And so the KGB and the CIA both, and a lot of these, a lot of these sort of secret organizations back in the day, um, created this idea of psychological operations, right? Psyops, they
Yeah.
call it, right?
Psyops.
Yeah. And so um, and we use them, back in Iran Contra, to go into places and to sow seeds of disinformation, misinformation. Well, it works so well that our competition, I almost call them enemies, not really our enemies, but our competition, the other world leaders, China, Russia, took notice of how well this worked and started using it and implementing it on us in America. All right. And it's known as the subversion process. And how it works essentially is you attack ethics and morality is one of the first things that you attack. Religion, and these are the areas that are attacked. This is called the first stage. There's 4 stages. The first stage is the demoralization process. Okay, and so the idea is to attack. It says religion, but really attack morals is the goal. But religion, our morals stem from our religious beliefs in America, or at least used to, and so that was why religion was attacked or decided. And education is attacked, and then media is attacked and used, and culture. Which includes things like patriotism, right? And so all of these things are attacked, and the goal is a death wish for religion. And methods are entertainment, okay, commercials, politics, and education. We teach permissiveness and relativity. You'll notice again, relativity is taught because it's part of the demoralization process, and this creates ignorance. We use the media to monopolize, manipulate, discredit, divert, and the result is myopia. And then we use culture. We use false heroes. It's no accident that the most watched and expensive movie of the last decade has been the Marvel movies and Disney, right?
The Avengers series,
The Avengers series and all of that, right? And Star Wars, and people love that stuff. What are that? What is that? False heroes, right? Why? Why care about false heroes? Well, because it takes away from real heroes. Real heroes can never attain the level of awesomeness that a false hero can attain. And so it makes figures like Jesus seem less amazing, because we have figures like Iron Man out there doing these awesome things, right? And kids are falling in love with Iron Man instead of Jesus. And that's the goal, right? It takes away the role models, and it creates these addictive fads. So after the demoralization process, we sort of enter this destabilization process where you attack law and order, and this idea of mistrusting justice. Oh, the justice system is all corrupt and it's all racist, right? Our justice system is all racist. And then we have this idea of social relations, rights versus obligations. we push the idea of less individual responsibility, which goes back to relativity. In a system of relativity, the individual is never responsible because they're always a victim of the system, right? Security, intelligence, police, military, attacking, and we see this, right? We see that we need to defund the police. We need to defund the military. We make love, not war, right? Internal politics, disunity, party antagonism, and like you were talking about, having these polarizations, party polarizations. That's the goal. Pushing the parties as far apart as possible so that they can't cooperate to get anything done. And that fundamentally makes us an unstable society. Foreign relations, creating, using victimization and creating salt friends, salting the earth so that we can't, those types of things. And then attacking family, health, race, population, labor, right? All of these things through sports. And this leads to destabilization. It leads to a power struggle. It leads to economic instability, society instability, and foreign isolation. And then we introduce a crisis like COVID. Okay. When you introduce a crisis to a nation that is polarized, what happens? They cannot agree on how to deal with the crisis, and that causes a collapse. And then a new normal, right? And we heard this term all the time, the new normal, right?
Matt, you're depressing me.
Well, hey, don't worry. There is a solution to all this. I'm explaining the problem, but I'm going to also tell you the solution, okay? The new normal then becomes a demoralized society that is in an economic
is
depression,
ignorant, doesn't have any religion,
and power struggle. Exactly, right. Yep. And so that's the goal of the psychological subversion process, these psyops processes. And so we have this idea of moral relativism over moral absolutism. And you can see it happen, okay? If you look right here, okay? So absolute morality, people who believe in absolute religious morality, okay? Elders, 33%, boomers, 42%, surprisingly there, maybe. Yeah. And then Gen Xers, 33 again, and millennials, 31. So we have this sort of downcline in absolute morality, and relativity. We have this upswing of people who are beginning more and more to view morality as being relative. This is an indication that this process is working, especially in our younger people. But interestingly, when you look at this, practicing Christians, 60% say morality is absolute, but there's 28% of practicing Christians and then another 14% who aren't thinking that are kind of on the fence about whether or not the Bible teaches morality. That's interesting, very interesting to me. And then people with no faith, 61%, are moral relativists, right? And so,
because that was a Barna poll from 2015. Barna is great, by the way. If you ever want to go to their website, they have been doing polls like this for years and years and years. I mean, decades.
Absolutely.
And they're very good at it. So you picked a good one here, Matt. Matt knows his stuff. But there is actually a new one that they did in, I believe it was 21. Don't hold me to it, but I think it was 21.
I'm sure it's even more.
It was terrible. It was depressing.
I was gonna say it's even more, right? It's getting worse, not better. So here's what's interesting is, the highest. This was the question that they asked people, and that people agreed with, is the highest good according to our society is finding yourself and then living by what's right for you. That is moral relativism, right? And that's what's pervading modern American society. There's a tremendous amount of individualism in our society that's reflected in the church too. We've got millions of Christians have grafted this new age dogma onto their spiritual person. When we peel back the layers, what we find is that many Christians are using the way of Jesus to pursue the way of self.
Yeah.
And so we even find, like you said, we find that religion, the separation of church and state has worked for the state, but not so much for the church, because the church has become more reflective of the state and not the other way around. While we wring our hands about secularism spreading through culture, a majority of church-going Christians have actually embraced corrupt, me-centered theology, right?
Yes.
And so these are sort of these six tenets of relativism, and 91% of U.S. adults somewhat agree that the best way to find yourself is by looking within yourself, rather than,
that's
of course,
Oprah. That's the whole Oprah
right.
thing, you
Right.
know?
Yep. Yeah. Rather than looking to God, right? And even modern Christians, most modern Christians seem to believe that the Bible is a source of moral norms and that transcend a person's culture, and that those moral truths are absolute rather than relative to circumstances. Yet at the same time, a solid majority ascribes to 5 of the 6 tenets of the new moral code.
Yeah.
So it's, this may sound bleak, but all right, here's the good news. It also represents an opportunity for leaders and mentors, especially church leaders and community mentors, people like us who are prepared to coach people toward deeper wisdom and greater discernment and away from self-fulfillment as a moral compass. And so we have this sort of idea of moral relativism is the terrible idea that narcissistic tendencies are the highest moral goal, right? And so we're creating a society of...
Hold on, Matt. I have to take my picture here just with us. Sorry.
All right.
I used to forbid my kids from doing that because I was like, oh my gosh, taking selfies is like the most narcissistic. It makes me cringe.
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of brought up that way, and I just can't.
We have generations of kids in love with their own reflections, and we're teaching them through social media that the most important thing in life is how many likes you can get from strangers. So what is that teaching them? That the opinions of others are the most important things that matter to your life, right? And how you look.
Yeah.
And so these are terrible things to be teaching young people, right? And so at the same time, we're teaching that narcissistic tendencies are the highest moral goal, which is the goal of moral relativism. We're also simultaneously teaching kids that we're weaponizing the status of the self as a perpetual victim to attain the goals of self-justification, to avoid personal consequence and responsibility, and to obtain instant gratification. So I'm a victim of the system. Woe is me. And I'm never responsible for any of my own behavior or my plight in the world, because I'm just a victim of a system that always has its foot on my back, right?
Well, and another thing, and people have laughed at me about this, my own kids laugh at me about this, which obviously I don't care about. But I think one of the other things that they did culturally to kind of we avoid personal consequences, right? It can't be me. I mean, if you ever say, hey, what are you thinking there? My bad. What does my bad mean? My kids were expressly forbade of saying my bad because it doesn't mean anything. You're not saying
You're not saying I'm sorry.
I apologize.
Right.
You're saying some phrase that is completely meaningless that you just, popped off the top of your head. But the whole idea is I am sorry. I apologize for what I did. That was wrong. I take the consequence. And it's funny, but even though people will laugh about that, that's exactly the kind of stuff we're trying to say here. It exudes into the culture in these weird ways, and we overlook them because we think, well, what difference does it matter if you say my bad, right?
Right.
But it's these kinds of things that seep into the culture that just bring everything right down into the trash can.
Exactly. And so the 3 hardest things for people under 40 to say is, I'm sorry, it was my fault, and I don't actually know everything, right?
Yeah. It,
So, and all of
My
these
bad.
things, the reason that all of these things are so hard to say is because they bruise the ego. Right?
Oh, yeah.
They're an
Yeah.
assault on the ego, and we have this idea. There's this idea that the worst thing you can do in our society is bruise somebody's ego, right? Um, which of course reinforces the idea of moral relativism and creates narcissistic tendencies, right? And so we have this idea of sort of my feelings validate reality rather than moral absolutism, which there is a good and there is a bad, and these things are clearly defined and they are absolute, and your actions, your conduct is judged, your individual actions are judged against these absolute good and bad standards, right?
Yeah.
Which is what, Christian, but people don't like this, right? Oh, you're being judgmental, you're or
That's so judgy, Matt.
that's so judgy, right? That's so judgy. Well,
Judgy. You're so judgy.
the problem, of course, with moral relativism is that there's no standards in which to judge conduct. So if somebody can justify
Yeah.
pretty much anything, then they can get away with it. It's not wrong, right? They can justify it because they're a victim of their own brain. Oh, I'm not a pedophile. I'm a minor attracted person because my brain is, or I'm there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with being gay or lesbian. I'm just attracted to people of the same sex or the same gender. Well, why is, we have to ask ourselves the question of why, fundamentally, is it wrong to do something like that, to be attracted to a minor person? Well, it goes back to the fact that minors don't understand, they can't consent to or understand that relationship. They can't understand a relationship at the same level. So as an adult, and it goes back to consent, the issue of consent, right? And so we have this sort of dichotomy of these things are definitely good and bad, but if we can make them morally relative, then we can justify almost anything, including rape and murder, as long as it's, So how did this happen? Well, I was talking about the PSYOP stuff back in the Iran Contra. This is actually from the CIA. This is their psychological operations and guerrilla warfare handbook that they used during the Iran Contra ordeal. You can find the whole thing here. I've got a link to it. It's a very interesting study in what's currently happening in America.
Yeah.
And the CIA was just beginning to use it back during the Iran Contra psyops. And yes, you read that correctly. Over here, it says the warfare goal is the mind, right? It says, in effect, the human being should be considered the priority objective in a political war and conceived as the military target. So the human being, the human mind itself is the military target of guerrilla warfare. The human being has the most critical point in his mind. Once his mind has been reached, the political animal has been defeated without necessarily receiving bullets. And so that's the goal of psychological operations. And guerrilla warfare is born and grows in the political environment, in the constant combat, right? That is inherent to all human beings, the environment. And then it says this, which is sickening. This concept of guerrilla warfare as political war turns psychological operations into the decisive factor of the results. The target then is the mind of the population. All the population, our troops, the enemy's troops, and even the civilian population. And unfortunately, even children are considered to be morally acceptable targets in psychological warfare. And so that's how we got, unfortunately, to where we are now.
Sounds like global Marxism.
That's exactly what it is. You got it. And so we have the 4 stages that I talked about earlier. the demoralization stage, the destabilization stage, the crisis, and the normalization period, until the next cycle repeats. But we can defend ourselves, okay? And one of the best ways to defend ourselves, this is a great website, Disinformation Nation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this website.
No, I love that. Wow.
Yeah, and so it's a website that talks about propaganda and how it works and why it matters and how to combat it. And so there's a quick little video here if you want to take a look at it. Hopefully it'll play.
It's playing. I just can't hear it. Is it supposed to be?
Are you not able to hear it?
No, can you? Oh, and your audio is up. I wonder why.
Well, sometimes on your side, Matt, sometimes there's a little pop-up that comes up that says you have to allow the audio to actually play. Maybe
Gotcha.
it's not up.
It says you are sharing your entire screen, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes on those videos, Jenny, from the guest side, there's a little pop-up that comes up that says,
Okay.
do you want to allow like your screen to actually play sounds in the broadcast? But I'm not sure.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I'm not sure how to. Well, that's okay. We don't have to. We don't have to.
Well, we're
watch
only
the video.
almost to 2 hours, so we.
Right, I know. We don't have to watch the video. I just want to. The main thing I want to take a look at is how propaganda works, and we can look at it this way. So, propaganda, of course, is designed to promote a specific cause, a specific ideology, or a specific group of individuals, and then or reinforce thoughts and feelings inside of somebody that may already be there and make them stronger and make them grow, right? That's the goal. The target audience is the people who need to see the message. And sometimes it's people who already agree with the message, and sometimes it's people who don't agree with the message, and that changes how the propaganda is set up and staged. And then extra credit is if you disguise the delivery. The general goal is you don't want anyone to know that they're actually looking at propaganda.
Being propagandized.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And so, propaganda isn't inherently good or evil. It kind of depends to some extent on your outlook. It's a tool, just like any tool that can be used to our advantage or to our disadvantage. It is legal because it is covered under the First Amendment. Now, covert propaganda is illegal. But as long as it's overt propaganda, it's legal. Its First Amendment allows it, allows information, real or fake, objective or manipulative, honest or deceptive, to circulate freely. Okay.
Wait, I think somebody better give that memo to like Facebook and, Twitter and some of the social media sites.
Yeah,
might
exactly.
need that information.
They might need to know that, exactly. And advertising, of course, is one of the most common forms of propaganda we see every day. Carrot juice cures everything. Okay. And so the four SEED is sort of the acronym here of the propaganda master's toolbox. Simplify, over here, our free press. Look at our free press, MSNBC. We have the best news story, but look over there at their controlled press. Their stuff is propaganda. Our stuff is free, So it's an oversimplification of reality. That's, kind of the point there. Exaggeration. Celery juice, it's a life-saving medicine. Really? Celery juice is a life-saving? Okay. Over exaggeration of almost anything and everything. We see that constantly in most of the news articles today because it sells headline. Over exaggerating things it's a debate that's at the end of the hook, right? That gets people interested in reading it or learning more about it. Exploitation, specifically exploitation of ignorance. The H1N1 flu shot contains carcinogens and immunotoxins and neurotoxins. Potassium chloride, guys, that's just salt. It's not a neurotoxin. But it's the way that this is phrased makes it look it's exploiting the ignorance of the people who don't maybe know what potassium chloride actually is, right? Or sodium. It's salt, right? But no, it's not salt. It's a carcinogen. It's an immunotoxin. Okay. And then division, which is what you're talking about. Promoting division. It's us versus them. That's one of the main goals of propaganda. Dehumanization, I would also add, is another main goal. So propaganda isn't anything new. It's been around for years and years. Why propaganda matters, and this is a good little demonstration here of this girl on the left has been watching watching news channels, 24-hour news cycle, and you can see the effect it has on her psychology, because she's been programmed for the last several hours to see the world as some evil thing. And this same girl on the right turned off the TV and hit the off button and is not watching the propaganda, right? And so the idea here is that it psychologically, it does something to us when we see all of this constant negativity. It drains us, and it prevents us from having the freedom to make good decisions. We're more apt to leap to conclusions, waste money, deepens divisions, endangers everyone, and it damages our democracy fundamentally, and our elections, and whether or not they're trustworthy. Rewriting history, we see this a lot, right? This attempt to rewrite history and to slant everything in favor of one ideological way of thinking. Blurring lines between facts and fictions, deep fakes, especially with AI and technology.
Yeah.
It's hard nowadays to know whether or not something's real, right?
Yeah.
They take sound bites and clips of the president, and did he really say that or not?
And I saw a video of him the other day with this weird thing going on his chin.
Yeah.
Well, and Matt,
That's a deep fake.
That propaganda run long enough and run with enough kind of merit behind it actually changes the culture. It changes how we think, how we feel, what we buy, what we do. It's like, Jenny, when I said you need to read that book, Propaganda by Edward Bernays. I mean, you go back to that book and just look at as an example of an American staple in today's society, like eggs and bacon for breakfast. You know who did that? Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was paid. They put out a whole commission. They did this whole deal. He basically created that with this whole deal. And like I said, I think I mentioned like the women smoking. They branded that whole deal in propaganda as like freedom torches. That's so it works its way into society, and then it just becomes part of our culture. We don't even realize it's a psychological operation. I mean, I'm so glad, Matt, that you started hitting on. I mean, this stuff is like right up my alley. I mean, this is what I try to look at all the time. But you're 100% right. And and just another side of that, the whole thing is kind of like a Hegelian dialectic, where they already have the problem, they have the reaction, and they know what the solution is. It's already all created. They're just running the process on us.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. It's already, the goal is the outcome always with propaganda.
Yes.
And it's not it's not to actually, even people, even when we see propaganda that is opposing to our points of view, even that has a psychological effect on us, and it makes us feel defeated, right? When we see.
So I'm going to give you an example really quick too, because how when in Trump's last election, and I'm just using this because it was hammered in the media for a long time afterwards, Fox Business, who was doing the election returns at the time, and came out and called Biden the winner before anything else. And it's been shown over and over again that if a voter has not left his home, is not out and ready to go vote, they simply won't leave their home if they believe somebody else has won
has
the
already
election.
won.
And
What's the point? You don't need
that's
my vote.
propaganda.
Absolutely.
That's literally propaganda.
Absolutely it is.
And they do it frequently, these dumb news, who come out and say, well, we're doing election returns. No, you're figuring out a way to propagandize us to keep voters. It's voter suppression. Really, it's propaganda to create voter suppression.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And there's propaganda to create fear. There's propaganda to create voter suppression. There's propaganda to create, and the goal of propaganda and the propaganda machines in our country, which are trillions of, is a $1 trillion industry at this point, is to get someone to buy your product, get someone to watch your channel, get someone to it's all about money at the end of the day. These people are money is still the fundamental motivation behind why they do what they do, and power, of course, and it's also about getting somebody to vote or to not vote. And so propaganda aimed toward your own side is trying to encourage them to get out and go vote. Propaganda aimed towards the other side, like you said, is trying to encourage them to think that the vote is already over and their vote is pointless and to stay home, right? And so, the whole thing is rise above it, right? How do we fight back against it? Rise above it. Strategy one, do a gut check. Harness the power of doubt. If something feels wrong about it, it probably is. You need to think a little bit more into it.
Well, and Christians call that discernment. And I think a lot of Christians really need to practice that discernment. I mean, God gives you the little voice in your head. He is the little voice in your head. If it's something isn't right, it's not right.
You may be thrilled or outraged, depending on what what your point of view is and what you're looking at, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's propaganda. It does, however, mean you should take a minute and think about it, pay special attention, and ask, wait, is this the whole story? That's one of the biggest questions we need to ask. Is this the whole story? Or are we just getting a portion of it? Do the facts support the shocking claims? Do the facts support what is being claimed here? Usually, if it's propaganda, it doesn't, or it only partially does. And why did the content creator take such a provocative approach? That's the other question. When we see headlines like, New Jersey man killed in accident, why, I don't know. I live in Oklahoma. I feel sorry for the guy, but why do I care? Right. What is this? Why is this being pushed on me?
Because it was a gun that actually jumped out of his night table and killed him.
Right. Right. Exactly. There's always a real reason why a story like that is being pushed. And you need to look past the propaganda and ask yourself these questions of why is the person that created this want me to believe this? Right. Yeah. So doing the gut check, and then also being careful on what you invite into your home. Try to limit your interactions with inflammatory or questionable content. Once you interact with it, your chances of seeing more of it increase, okay? Because Facebook, for example, uses user data to target potential mothers with content, taking a shortcut to a prime audience. Platforms like YouTube use algorithms that tend to recommend extreme click-grabbing content for people, right? And so, especially on a young mind, kids and teenagers, this stuff is very,
which is why we've said over and over again, parents have to have apps in place that
Yep.
throttle their kids' ability to get onto the internet and what they can see on the internet.
Exactly. So before you browse online, log out of your browser or choose one that doesn't track you, such as Firefox or there's
Brave.
DuckDuckGo or whatever. There's lots of ones out there now that will block these trackers, and there's apps that'll help you block these trackers, and that helps limit some of this stuff. Log out of platforms like YouTube and Facebook once you've finished accessing the content. Avoid using likes and share buttons on web pages, which connect these sites directly to your social media accounts. Anytime something asks, we want access to your Facebook account, usually is not something you want to, periodically delete your search history, because, it uses cookies and search history to help, bring that content to you. So those are good internet practices to teach kids. And then find your five. This is this idea of having multiple sources of news. And they recommend 2 general news sources that you look at a regular basis that you agree with, 2 news sources you don't agree with, and then 1 sort of independent source that covers it from a specific perspective, such as a particular demographic, religious group, or profession. Professional, like peer-reviewed journals, scientific journals, legal journals, things like that. Or sometimes I like watching independent news sites from other countries. Get outside of America and look at news sources from outside of the American mindset, and you might be surprised at some of the different things that you see. You can also use sites such as Newstrition or All Sides that help you evaluate different sources of news. Even though I will say sometimes even these sites that evaluate the other sites, again, we go back to the problem of who watches the watchers. These sites that evaluate these sites are also paid money to give specific evaluations of the other one, of the people that they're evaluating. So you still got to be careful about who you're trusting about that type of thing. So, how do we protect our children? That's the bottom line of, propaganda. How do we protect ourselves and protect our children? Our children are the most valuable resource that we have. And this is why the battle for psychological control of our nation begins and ends in the minds of the next generation, because the future of our nation is currently in their brains, right?
Yeah.
So our enemies want to demoralize our children, turn them against their own country, their own parents, their own culture, their own history, their own foundation beliefs, and that make them and America strong. So how do we fix it? Well, parents still have the legal power to control how their children are raised, but is this good news considering the millennials and Gen Xers are now primarily the current parental authorities? Yes, because even among the younger generations, there is still a vibrant culture of traditionalists fighting against all of this new cultural change. And we can and should be empowering those folks in the younger generations. Those parents can monitor closely the content their children are exposed to and help influence other parents, right, in their generation to do the same. Keep them away from public schools, limit their time spent in front of social media, TV, music, news, video games, etc. That's how this propaganda is getting into our homes and into the minds of our kids. However, ultimately, parents can't hide their kids from the world forever. So the most important thing a parent can do is keep an open, honest, and deep ongoing conversation with their kids so that they can continue, so that the kids continue to trust the family unit as the ultimate source of credible information. And that,
I hate to say this, but we're going to have to end on that one because Michael's going to have to go here in a second.
Okay.
But
that's fine. We're pretty much.
We need to bring them back on and keep rolling.
Yeah, we totally do. And as a matter of fact, I was thinking about actually taking this video and chopping it up into 2 separate parts.
Sure,
because one of them, the whole propaganda section, I think people are really going to have a considerable amount of interest in, and we need to really take the time to talk about that. But the sad thing about it is, I mean, we've got quite a number of people watching now, which is great. But the whole part where you talked about ethics, it's like people just don't care. And it's the
Yeah.
whole bottom line for everything that's going on. And our watcher this morning from Facebook, who's been commenting, Carl, just said something about really local control is the most important thing. And as managing our own families and being in our own communities and doing what we can inside our own communities is the only way to change any of it, if at this point it's changeable. So
Well,
you know
it is, but there's the if there's anything to really take away from this, it's that people can't expect instant changes.
Yes.
Uh, while
You
there are
can't turn
some
the
instant.
Titanic on a dime.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it took us 40 years. We've established that it took us 40 years to get here. It's going to take us 40 years to undo that, damage. Maybe a little quicker than 40 years if we're lucky, but but it's going to take time, right? You don't just undo psychological
Warfare.
damage overnight. And so,
Well,
but it is possible. The good news is it is possible. So.
Yeah. Well, if I can chime in on that, Matt, I think the first step is really, as a father, I have 5 kids. It's just really realizing and taking the responsibility that I'm responsible for myself. I'm responsible to teach my kids that they are responsible. I want to empower them. They're in a constant state of disempowerment with all this conditioning, just constantly. And you kind of mentioned it before, where we kind of have a total victim, mentality, to where everything is happening to me. I feel so bad. There's no empowerment in that. And that's where you get all this chaos. So who's the only person that's left to come in and solve that problem? The government, the big guys. So the more that they can sow these seeds of disempowerment and victimization and this group and that group, the more that all that happens, now we're completely disempowered. They are the only answer to this. So I would say, for me, is first, just realize, yes, this stuff is happening. And second, I'm going to take responsibility to constantly just call it out as I see it to my kids. I'm the one responsible for how I feel, not the government, not this bully, not someone saying something like this. I'm responsible for how I feel. And as long as I do that, then I can start turning that ship, slowly through my own teachings to my kids and my friends and my family, and in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that that's right in line with that, that I completely agree with you, Michael, and that is that Democrats love to their message is you're a victim of an oppressive society and an oppressive government. And you know what the solution to that is? More government, right? That doesn't make sense, right? The problem is that the system is oppressive. So what's the solution? More system. What? So you're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense. I think at the end of the day, I think there's a lot that conservatives and liberals both agree about what the problem is, but don't agree as to what the solution to that problem is, if that makes any sense. And at the end of the day, I think we've tried. The proof is in the pudding. We all you have to do is look around the nation and look at where those policies have been implemented, and the chaos that has come from that. And even right here in Norman, we have stuff going on with homelessness, and that we didn't have 5 years ago, even before some of these policies were implemented. And it's an unfortunate that we got to this point. But hopefully, I think people are starting to see it more and starting to realize, hey, we're being billed something here that is not what we signed up for. So I completely agree. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this and appreciate
Oh,
talking to
Matt,
you.
it
Yeah.
was honestly, it was way more than I even expected.
Well, I'm sorry. I
You
hope I didn't go
overshot your
overboard there.
mark. It was phenomenal. So
Okay.
thank you so much for being on with us today. Really, truly, and I will get all that stuff taken care of this afternoon so that we can get all of this information out so that people can find it and click on the links themselves. And
Awesome.
I am going to go ahead and edit the video down so we've got two separate ones and people have, yeah, I think a little better chance of watching both of them if we do that. So
Yeah, for sure.
again, thank you so much, Matt. And we hope to call on you again another time, as a
Yeah,
matter of fact.
definitely.
Sure.
You know,
I got a new baby coming, so I'm going to be busy for a bit with that. But after,
they take care of themselves.
right? Yeah.
Well, thanks
They,
again, Matt. And we do hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for everything you did for us today.
sure. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks,
God bless.
Matt.
Thanks.